So good day, everyone. So for today's class, I'll be discussing to you the agree to instrument. So basically, class, this is a way for us to evaluate the validity of a clinical guideline based on our own understanding. Okay. Now this one, class, is an instrument that's widely used, again, mostly to evaluate clinical guidelines. So class, when you start presenting your case presentation sa akin, di ba, one of my primary requirement will always be a clinical guideline. Now, the clinical guideline, class, should of course be legitimate, and you'll know it's legit, class, if you can score it using the agree to scoring system. All right? Okay, so class, hence, what I'll be giving you as dito, a sample template of a clinical guideline based on the Philippines, so that's for diabetes, and I'll have you guys score it using the agree to scoring system. Okay? So what is the agree to scoring system? So basically, class, clinical practice guidelines are systematically developed statements to assist practitioners and patients in decision making about their healthcare or specific clinical circumstances. Now, in addition, class, guidelines can play an important role in health policy formation and have evolved to cover topics across the healthcare continuum, such as health promotion, screening, and diagnosis. So basically, class, halos lahat ng problems, halos lahat ng conditions na meron tayo, okay, we can definitely find a clinical guideline for that. Okay, preferably, class, when you do your presentation, when you do your case studies, okay, yung clinical guideline na gagamitin nyo is for the Filipinos. Okay, especially when it comes to endocrine disorders, class, marami tayong clinical guidelines designed for Filipinos. Kung wala naman, class, we can use clinical guidelines from abroad. Okay, pero just make sure, class, na applicable din siya sa case ninyo. So the potential benefits of guidelines are only as good as the quality of the guidelines themselves. Sabi nga natin, di ba? Kung ang isang guideline, class, gawa lang sa putyo-putyong statements, okay, putyo-putyo lang din ang magiging output doon. So, agree to is a means for us to evaluate the validity of a clinical guideline. Okay, so the appraisal of guidelines for research and evaluation, what we call the agree instrument, okay, was developed to address the issues of variability in guideline quality. To that end, the agree to instrument is a tool to assess the methodological rigor and transparency in which a guideline is developed. So the original agree to instrument was refined, which resulted to the agree to, and a user manual was developed, which is this one. Okay, so the purpose of the agree to is to assess the quality of the guidelines, provide a methodological strategy and for the development of guidelines, and to inform what information and how information ought to be reported in guidelines. So the agree to replace the original instrument, blah, blah, blah. All right? So how do we use the agree to? Okay, so which guidelines can be appraised with the agree to? So as the original instrument, the agree to is designed to assess guidelines developed by local, regional, national, or international groups or affiliated governmental organizations. So this includes original versions of and updates of existing guidelines. Okay, so who can use the agree to? Obviously, us, being healthcare providers, guideline developers, policymakers, and especially us educators, okay, to help enhance critical appraisal skills amongst health professionals and teach core competencies in guideline development and reporting. So hence, class, again, before you use, class, a clinical guideline, I will require you guys to make an agree to scoring of that clinical guidelines. The clinical guideline you will be using for your case presentation. Right? Okay. So here's the manual, class. So how do we use the manual now? So before applying agree to, users should first carefully read the guideline document in full. So kumbaga, class, hindi pwedeng habang binabasa mo siya, iniscorean mo na agad yung guidelines. No. Okay? You and your group mates, class, should read the document first. Okay, basahin nyo muna. Then after nyo mabasa, saka nyo i-apply ngayon yung agree to scoring. So in addition to the guideline document, users should attempt to identify all information about the guideline development process prior to the appraisal. So this information may be contained in the same document as the guideline recommendations, or it may be summarized in a separate technical report. Okay? Now, ilan ang number of appraisers dapat? Okay? It is recommended, class, that each guideline be assessed by at least 2 appraisers. At least. Right? Pero pinakamaganda, syempre, kung 4 ang appraisers nyo. Okay? As this will increase the reliability of the assessment. That's why, class, ang minimum number of grouping ninyo is 2. right? 2 per group. Okay, so what is the domain for each, for the agree to guidelines? So there are a total of 6 domains: scope and purpose, stakeholders involvement, rigor of development, clarity of presentation, applicability, and editorial independence. So the agree to consists of 23 key items organized within 6 domains, followed by 2 global rating items, or what you call overall assessment. So each domain captures a unique dimension of the guideline quality. Okay, so halimbawa, the first 3 question would be for domain 1. The 4th to 6th question will be for domain 2. Okay, and so on and so forth. So I leave this class for you guys to read. Right? So para maintindihan niyo. Then lastly, class would be the overall assessment. So kumbaga, as a evaluator of that clinical guideline, what will be your overall rating? Okay? Kumbaga, is it a 5 out of 5? Or a 3 out of 5 type of guideline? Okay, again, depende ito sa nag-evaluate. So how do we rate this? Normally, class, we rate this using a 7-point scale. So that's strongly disagree for 1, strongly agree for 7. Okay, so strongly disagree. A score of 1 should be given when there is no information that is relevant to the agree to item. Okay? If the concept is very poorly reported or if the authors state explicitly that criteria were not met. 7, a score of 7 should be given if the quality of the reporting is exceptional. Now, the scores between 2 and 6 is assigned when the reporting of the agreed to item does not meet the full criteria or the consideration. Okay, so a score is assigned depending on the completeness and quality of the reporting. Scores increase as more criteria are met and considerations addressed. Now, the how to rate section for each item includes details about the assessment criteria. Okay? So where to look, class? Halimbawa, bawat domain kasi, ini-indicate doon kung saan mo hahanapin yung mga information na yon. Okay, so obviously, class, you just have to look at that. Okay? It is the responsibility of the appraiser to review the entire guideline and accompanying materials to ensure fair evaluation. Right? And class, yeah. Okay, so how to rate? Again, I leave this all to you. Okay, please read this. Okay, so that you can understand how you're supposed to rate fairly, okay, the clinical guideline. Now, eto class, how do you score each domain? Kasi bawat domain, nalagyan mo ng isang score. Okay? So, domain scores are calculated by summing up all the scores of the individual items in a domain and by scaling the total as a percentage of the maximum possible score. Right? So, halimbawa, dalawa lang kayong appraiser. So, halimbawa, for item, this is for domain 1. So, 3 questions yon. So, appraiser 1 sa item 1, 5, 6, 6. So, get the total class, that will be 17. Okay? Appraiser 2, kunwari, hanggang dito lang tayo. So, ito yung naman scoring, 6, 6, 7. Total niyan will be 19. So, kunwari, wala tayong appraiser 3, appraiser 4. So, you just get the total class. So, 17 plus 19, that's 36. 36. So, that will be your score here, 36. Pero sabihin natin, class, since ang example lang dito is for appraisers, so ito muna. So, ang total ko dito would be 53. So, what is the maximum possible score? The maximum possible score, class, would be if every item here was scored as 7. So, 777, 777, 777, 777, ganyan. So, kung in class, ang maximum possible score would be 7 times 3, kasi 3 items yon, times 4 appraisers. Okay, so that would be the maximum possible score would be 84. And then the minimum possible score would be 1 for each. So, 1 times 3 times 4 would be 12. Then, class, if once na nakuha mo na to, okay, ang gagawin namin dyan, class, is yung obtain score minus the minimum possible score over the maximum possible score minus the minimum possible score. So, meaning, kung ang obtain score mo is 53, kanina 36 tayo. So, again, pero depende yan. So, here, in this case, it's 53. Yun yung obtain score minus the minimum possible score, which is 12. Then, the maximum possible score, which is 84, here, minus the minimum possible score, which is 12. So, 53 minus 12 over 84 minus 12 times 100, you'll get an answer, class, of 57%. For domain 1 lang yun. Okay, so class, when you are scoring your agree to, okay, you're scoring your clinical guidelines, I'll be looking for this computation. Okay? Now, what if items are not included? Appropriate modifications to the calculations of the maximum and minimum possible scores will be required. Now, halimbawa, class, in this case, for for an agree to appraisal, a domain should be at least greater than 70%. Okay, dapat yung score niya. If it's not 70% class, then most likely, hindi ganun kaganda yung clinical guideline na yun. Now, what if class, halimbawa, may isang item dito na hindi applicable sa clinical guideline na yun. Okay? So, for whatever reason, class. So, kung hindi kasama class, kumbaga, hindi applicable yung item na yun, just don't include it sa scoring ninyo. Like, halimbawa, item 3 is not, item 3 for domain 1, kunwari, hindi applicable yun for the clinical guideline that you're reading or that you're evaluating. Kung hindi siya applicable class, then obviously, 2 items lang ilalagay ko dito instead of 3. Tanggalin mo na lang yun. Huwag yun ang scorean. Sabihin nyo lang dito is NA, meaning hindi siya applicable for the clinical guideline that I am evaluating. So, mag-adjust yung mga scores nyo dito sa maximum at sa minimum possible scores. Okay? So, I hope that's clear. Then, for the overall assessment class, upon completing the 23 item, users will provide 2 overall assessments of the guideline. So, the overall assessment requires the user to make a judgment as to the quality of the guideline, taking into account the criteria considered in the assessment process. So, the user is also asked whether he or she would recommend the use of the guideline. Alright? So, then class, this would be your, ito yung hahanapin kong gawa ninyo. Alright? And this will be also class part of the activity that you'll be making. So, I'll be giving you a sample clinical guideline. Okay? And the sample clinical guideline that I'll be giving you would be this one. Right? Unite for Diabetes Philippines. This is a clinical guideline in managing diabetes. Okay? So, ipapa-evaluate ko to sa inyo. Okay? Nakakatuwa nga to kasi kung titignan nyo class, sa bandang dulo, they're actually asking the readers to, see? They ask the readers, okay, to make an agree evaluation of this specific guideline. So, alam mo legit talaga siya. Alright? Pero ito, 4 scaling lang. Kasi bago ngayong agree to is 7 scales. Okay, 7-point scale. Alright? Yan. So, bawat isa sa inyo, okay, so each member of the group should have one of these. Okay? Andiyan naman class, nabigyan naman dyan ng where to look, how to rate, then additional considerations, and then your comments or suggestions. Okay, for each item. Okay? Okay, so please read this carefully. Okay, so yan siya hanggang domain 6. Okay, so the overall assessment, again, 2 questions lang naman to. Ikaw ang sasagot dyan based on your own perception. Okay, and then if you have some additional notes that you would like to add, you can always put it here. Right? Okay, so that's pretty much it, class, for the agree to instrument. So again, part of your activity class will be to evaluate this clinical guideline on the management of diabetes in the Philippines. Okay? All right. Thank you very much for listening, class. And good luck in appraising this clinical guideline.